Luke, the first chapter, beginning at the 67th verse. And his father Zacharias was filled with Ruach HaKodesh, and prophesied, saying, Blessed be Yahweh Elohim, or Yasharal, for he hath visited and redeemed his people, and hath raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he spake by the mouth of his holy prophets, which have been since the world began, that we should be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all that hate us, to perform the mercy promised to our fathers, and to remember his holy covenant, the oath which he sware to our father Abraham, that he would grant unto us that we, being delivered out of the hand of our enemies, might serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all the days of our life. And thou, child, shalt be called the prophet of the highest, for thou shalt go before the faces of Yahweh Elohim to prepare his ways, to give knowledge and salvation unto his people by the remission of their sins, through the tender mercy of Yahweh, whereby the dayspring from on high hath visited us, to give light to them that sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of SHALAWAM. And the child grew and waxed strong in Ruach HaKodesh, and was in the deserts till the day of his showing unto Yasharal. This is a reading, Luke, the first chapter, by his father, John the Baptist's father, Zechariah. And this is to advise us that there is a time when a horn will stand up that is sent by Yahweh Elohim, that will pierce its way through and prove to us that salvation is on our side, redemption is on our side, the Holy Covenant is on our side, and the deliverance out of the hand of our enemies is on our side, so that we might serve Yahweh without fear. See, don't forget that we have a problem with serving Yahweh Elohim while being captives. And it's not his will that we serve him by way of hard bondage captivity. It is his will that we serve him without fear. We don't need to be captive. We don't need to be under the yoke of an enemy. And we do not need to have the hand of all that hate us bearing down on us while we serve our Elohim. So I want you to understand today that this coincides, this dictation from the prophet Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. This piece of dictation is ideal at a time for right now, whereas there is the anti-lynching bill that is soon to become law. They're pursuing. They finally got it passed through the House and the Senate, through Congress, and now this thing is ready to become law after more than 200 attempts since the 1860s. The late 1860s, this bill has never been passed into law, and today is a milestone, huge milestone for Negroes, Hebrew, Israelites, Yasharal, the children of the chosen Yahweh Elohim. Shalawam.
I rise today in support of H.R.35, the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act. We'll be voting on this later this afternoon. I am pleased to see the House take steps in finally addressing this issue. Like many, despite our nation's ugly history of lynchings, I was shocked to learn that there was no law making lynching a federal hate crime. My home in Omaha area is unlike many other towns across the country with a gruesome past of lynching. George Smith was murdered in October 1891, and this past fall marked the 100th anniversary of the murder of Will Brown on the steps of the Douglas County Courthouse during the Red Summer. The hands of lawless and angry mobs in Omaha beat and lynched these men in what can only be characterized as racial terrorism. We cannot simply wash away the past, but in order for our nation to heal from past racial injustice, Congress must specify criminal penalties for the crime of lynching or conspiracy to commit lynching. With at least 5,000 lynchings in our nation's history, this bill is important as an acknowledgement that this evil did occur, that millions felt fear in their homes and communities, and that many feared for their lives, the lives of their dads and their sons, and that this formal acknowledgement will help facilitate reconciliation. Last year, I was approached by local African-American community leaders to look into anti-lynching legislation. And I felt that the language from Senator Harris's bill that passed with overwhelming bipartisan support in the Senate was the right one to support here in the House. This is how we're going to make a bill and get it signed by the President of the United States. It's because of these reasons that I was honored to introduce the Senate-passed language in the House. The bill we are voting on today contains language of my bill that I introduced 8 months ago verbatim. I do not complain, because in the end, I want results. We want results. We are closer than we have ever been in making lynching a federal crime. The action is long overdue, going back 200 attempts since 1918, and today we are going to make history once and for all on this issue. It has been my privilege to be an advocate on this issue. I applaud Senator Harris and Congressman Rush, who have championed this bill for years. We will finally get this to the President's desk to be signed into law in order to close one of the ugliest chapters in America's history once and for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
A somber tribute in Ocoee, almost 100 years after one of the darkest days in the town's history. The victims are being honored.
The news station's Amanda McKenzie was there for the unveiling of the historical marker.
The historical marker for Julius July Perry.
In front of hundreds of people gathered in downtown Orlando, this historical marker now stands in front of the History Center, honoring the life of July Perry, a prominent African-American businessman, landowner, and farmer who was lynched by a white mob almost 100 years ago. Today, his great-grandson, Stephen A. Nunn, recalls the stories from his grandmother who saw her father taken away.
For me personally, I got it from her perspective. She was in the house. She was there with her dad. She was a part of the exodus from Ocoee, by the FBI and the police to Orlando. So there were things that I was able to glean from her side.
On the night of Election Day, November 2nd, 1920, July Perry was ambushed by a mob of white men and lynched near downtown Orlando. That was the beginning of what came to be known as the Ocoee Massacre, as dozens of black citizens were murdered and their homes burned to the ground. This marker, now a reminder of that day.
What's important is that the community use this marker as a tool to start the conversations so that we know the history, so that we can start unveiling the truth, so that we can progress.
This marker represents the U.S. victims of lynching between 1877 and 1950.
We're seeing the results of justice today.
In Orlando, Amanda McKenzie, Fox 35 News.
I am asked frequently, why do anti-lynching legislation now? And I say this, we have people in our community, in our country, that have had family members murdered by lynching. We have people alive today that felt the fear of lynching. We should have passed anti-lynching legislation 100 years ago. Congress has tried dozens and dozens of times to do it, But for whatever reason, the House version doesn't match the Senate version, and there are never attempts to reconcile. I think it is right to do it, to set the record straight, to provide some level of closure, to help the healing and the reconciliation process, and to fully acknowledge that the murder of roughly 5,000 African Americans was terribly evil and wrong, and it was a hate crime.
Earlier this evening, during our 6 p.m. newscast, we told you about the history of lynchings right here in Central Georgia.
Murders committed, sometimes with an audience, and the killers often not held responsible, leaving the victims' families with little hope of justice.
Tonight, Aaron Rodgers shares how the surviving relatives of 2 lynching victims from Central Georgia are working to keep their memory alive.
Back in 1915, Alonzo Green and his son James were on their way home here in Jones County when they were attacked by a lynch mob. What happened to them was rarely talked about, even within their own family. But what was passed down, the family is now sharing with us.
It's kind of sad.
Walking down this wayside road is an emotional journey for Tasha Billingsley.
Just thinking about what they had to go through.
It was here, on Independence Day more than a century ago, her great-great-uncle and cousin had their fate sealed and freedom ripped away. What happened
Was definitely swept under the rug.
But in Tasha's family, the story of Alonzo Green and his son James was passed down through this woman, Tasha's grandmother, whose father was Alonzo's older brother.
He was shot. He had a teenage son with him at the time, and he exclaimed to the crowd, "I'm going home and tell my mother." After his dad was shot, then he was shot.
Tasha's father, Curtis Billingsley, says he heard the story from his mother-in-law many times.
It was just a picnic to bring justice upon someone. It didn't matter who.
While the oral history never went into a lot of detail.
We know that these kinds of things happen.
In a back room of the Jones County Courthouse is this newspaper article dated July 8, 1915, just 4 days after the murder. The words on the now frayed and faded paper describe a mob of hundreds looking to avenge a white farmer's killing. But when it came to the Greens, even the paper says these Negroes had nothing whatever to do with the crime.
Totally unfair. Due process is due everyone.
In an unusual occurrence during that time, there are some reports that a white man named Woodall Green did serve some jail time for Alonzo and James murders, but we found no evidence he was ever charged with the crimes.
Justice was never served. The lynch mob rule does not apply to justice.
But a delayed justice, or at least recognition, is why this group of community members meets once a month.
I thought that this was a piece of history that should come to light in Jones County.
Janice Kitchens, who's Tasha's cousin, is leading the charge, inspired after she visited the Memorial for Peace and Justice in Alabama, snapping this photo of the pillar with the names of those killed from Jones County.
It just moved me.
She learned the museum will donate duplicates of the pillar to each county where the lynchings occurred. This group now wants to honor the 5 people from Jones County, including Alonzo and James Green, by bringing their memorial home.
We just have to keep him alive.
There is a process, though, including a proposal, a historical marker, and revisiting the site of the lynching.
We collect the soil from this. It will assuage the spirits of Alonzo and his son James.
As we walked where the group believes the lynching happened, they told me they're not looking to blame, just remember.
They're digging up the past of those folks who were left out of the quote history book.
A reminder of what was and a hope for what can be. The group told me that they want to bring the marker back to the county by July, which is around the anniversary of the lynching. They're now looking for a permanent place to put the marker and are considering the Jones County Courthouse. In Jones County, I'm Aaron Rodgers, 13 WMAZ News.
And you can learn more about the facts of the Jones County case and listen to extended interviews with family members right now on 13WMAZ.com.
Just look for this story on our homepage.